in the black market here and in other countries, we're seeing fentanyl being put into cannabis, particularly vaped cannabis, and that's very, very toxic. So a regulated market is the only way to reduce the risk of serious contamination.
Now to Germany, where from today, April the 1st, no less, adults over the age of 18 will be allowed to possess 25 grams of cannabis and grow up to 3 cannabis plants at home. That's after a law passed its final hurdle in the Bundesrat 10 days ago. Professor David Nutt, former government chief drugs advisor and the chair of drug science, is with us now. David, good morning.
Good morning.
So what is the German rationale for legalising cannabis?
Well, I think it's due to a number of factors. I mean, it's redressing a historic wrong. It's trying to deal with the problem of black market cannabis causing more harm than natural cannabis. It's trying to bring an economic benefit to the country by taxing the use of cannabis, improving access for medical users, and hopefully sort of trying to reduce the consumption of alcohol, because we do know quite a few people who drink excessively would switch to cannabis if it was legal.
You said there it was about addressing a historic wrong. Why do you think that?
Well, cannabis should never have been illegal in the first place. I mean, it was made illegal at the early part of the last century for a complex series of reasons, pressure from pharmaceutical companies who couldn't patent it and therefore wanted people to use painkillers they could patent, like opiates and codeine and paracetamol. International pressure driven by the US, who, after they revoked alcohol prohibition, needed to keep the Drug Enforcement Agency of 35,000 people employed. So they made cannabis illegal and focused on the idea that Mexicans were bringing it into the country to gain maintenance effectively of their employment. And that's obviously carried on to this very present. And
the view from well, there's one drug addiction centre in Berlin. They've said, from our point of view, the law as it's written is a disaster. Access to the product is going to be easier. Its image will change. It will become more normalised, especially in young people. And they're expecting to see, well, an uptick in cannabis use.
Well, there will probably be some increase in cannabis use. The estimates in this country are the market saturated, but it's saturated with the worst kind of cannabis. And the black market essentially is economically driven. It maximizes the content of THC, which inevitably drives down the content of the protective agent cannabidiol. So people are getting the worst kind of cannabis in the black market. We know that in a regulated market, such as they have in Uruguay, you can specify the maximal amount of THC, you can specify optimal amounts of cannabidiol, and therefore sell people products which are actually less harmful.
And I guess people then know what they're inhaling if they grew it themselves. The health minister
said... More than that, can I just say more than that? We now, in the black market here and in other countries, we're seeing fentanyl being put into cannabis, particularly vaped cannabis, and that's very, very toxic. So a regulated market is the only way to reduce the risk of serious contamination.
The health minister was saying, look, please use it responsibly. What would responsible use even look like?
Well, it would look like not being intoxicated when you're trying to do important things, like drive cars or aircraft or go on TV or whatever, but use it for the reasons cannabis is used, to relax people, to help them sleep, to a substitute for intoxication with alcohol, etc.
There are other side effects. Ellie's just texted in complaining about one, saying, I'm a student in London. It's kind of ridiculous to suggest that cannabis isn't already legalised. The smell of stale cabbage is everywhere. It's very strong outside. As a non-smoker of anything, it makes me feel queasy indoors. My flatmate is always complaining to our landlord about the smell from our neighbours. I mean, it will change the aroma of the places where people are then more freely and openly, legally smoking cannabis, presumably.
It's perfectly possible, and now it's legal in Germany. We still will see this happening. It's perfectly possible to grow cannabis that doesn't smell. The smell has nothing to do with the psychoactive ingredients. The smell is due to terpenes. You can grow cannabis plants which don't have the same terpenes. You can grow the smell out. And also, of course, you can use cannabis in different ways. You can eat it or you can vape it. So
I
you can get
visited
rid
New
of
York recently, actually, and I have a really strong memory of the smell of cannabis wherever I went. And I guess, well, Ellie's suggesting that could be a concern. In practice, though, the law is actually quite limited in Germany. In big cities, you're not allowed to smoke weed within 100 metres of children's playgrounds, schools, sports centres. In busy, crowded cities, it may actually be difficult, David, to find a place where you are actually allowed to light up.
Yeah, I think this is not about public smoking of cannabis. This is about allowing people to have access to a relatively mild recreational drug, which they'll use generally in their own homes or in other people's homes. And that's why it's a real advance, because we know in the UK, and the same to some extent is true in Germany, millions of people are using black market illegal cannabis for recreation and for pain and anxiety control. And they don't know what they're getting. They're often getting stuff which is more toxic and more addictive than they need. And a regulated legal market is the way to break that and also bring income to the country as well.
Can we see this spreading across Europe, a legalisation of cannabis in this way, which says you could, grow it at home and carry this small amount?
Effectively, we will now. I think the German decision is a very important one, because other countries like Holland and Spain have come up with ways of getting around the cannabis laws, the international conventions. But Germany is the first country that actually says we don't really believe in them anymore. And because it's the most powerful country in Europe and got the biggest economy, it will certainly have repercussions. And on top of that, it's important to realize that there was pushback by the European community about this. And the pushback came from trying to essentially invoke the old UN conventions, which essentially say this is a dangerous drug with no medical value. And the Germans push back against that. And that is a huge statement. So this is the first major country to actually allow cannabis properly. Because in the States, you've got 100 million people who've got access to recreational cannabis, and 200 million have got access to medical cannabis, but it's still illegal under the law of the country. So this German decision is a massive decision for the rest of the world, and certainly for Europe.
And it comes into force today. Professor David Nutt, thank you. Former government chief of drugs advisor and chair of drug science. I have to say, I think I empathise with Ellie a little bit.
Yes.
The smell, and honestly, when I was in New York, I really couldn't believe it. It was around every corner. You just thought, wow, this is now kind of the flavour of the city.
It's a hard smell to describe, and actually Ellie does it quite well, saying it smells like stale cabbage. I remember, bless her, having this conversation with my mum a few years ago, because she was like, people talk about cannabis smelling. What's it smell like? So we were walking through London one day, and I said, right, smell that there? She goes, yeah, that is cannabis. And now she says, but you can smell it everywhere. She's noticing it all the time, and you can. Even in this country, with it being illegal, you do smell it everywhere.